Welcome to the Mets Pod. On today's show, SNY MLB insider Andy Martino joins us from the GM meetings in Las Vegas. We break down the Edwin Diaz extension, Jacob deGrom's future, and much more free agency business surrounding the team. Later on, Joe and I go through the internal decisions the Mets need to make quickly and how they might be aggressive towards some big names elsewhere. As always, we close out the show answering your mailbag questions, so subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Mets Pod. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo, and we have a special guest, SNY MLB insider Andy Martino, joining us from the GM meetings in Las Vegas. Andy, this time of year gets absolutely crazy. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm fine, thanks. It's an annual rite of the job here. When all the free agency starts and rumors and facts swirl around, and we have to try to distinguish between the two. But this year, actually, as you guys well know, is particularly interesting and will be busy in the New York front. Mets and Yankees both have a lot to deal with here, and the Mets, half the team seems to be free agents, so a lot going on. It hasn't really started yet, but we're getting there.
Yeah, the Mets wasted no time. Edwin Diaz getting record-setting contract for obviously a reliever. Got done fast here. Andy, can you give us any insight on how this went down and why it seemed like, from what we could tell, Diaz was the priority to get done in this short window before everybody can talk to everybody?
Yeah, at the end of the season, my reporting led me pretty clearly to Diaz being their top priority. They just feel, between what he's done on the field, they like him as a person. Cultural fits was a term that was used for me to describe Diaz and Nimmo as like the two guys at the Mets of all their free agents. I really want to do what they can to make sure they're part of the fold. And with Diaz, they benefited from the fact that he had explicitly stated that desire as well. Not that Nimmo doesn't want to be here, but we just expect Scott Boras tends to take his time. Nimmo's agent, they'll shop him around. There'll be tremendous interest in him, I think, around the league. There would have been in Diaz too, but they just got to a place financially where he felt like, I'm sure he was around what he was going to do elsewhere. He could make similar money with the Dodgers or wherever else would have wanted him, but he wanted to be a Met. The people involved in the actual negotiations and relationship with the player have good relationships on all sides. That helped. Diaz and his wife were at Steve and Alex Cohen's house not long ago, and really everybody, I was told, really hit it off, enjoyed each other. Diaz's agent at Wasserman, Joel Wolf, is not known as a guy that is going to try to squeeze every single penny out of you. He's a good advocate, great advocate for his players, one of the most respected agents in the business. But when he and Billy Epler got together with the mutual desire to get something done, Wolf's not the kind of agent that's going to try to screw you or anything or draw it out. So it's just it worked. The desires were there, and the people were the right fits to make it work in a hurry.
The next big domino is, of course, Jacob deGrom. And I think he kind of holds the key to where this offseason is going to go. If you're going to invest $40+ million a year into Jacob deGrom, that obviously limits what you can do elsewhere. What's the latest that you have on the status with Jake, and where do you kind of see that headed?
It's quiet so far. I mean, I think that Diaz being the priority in October tells you something. That doesn't mean, of course, that the Mets don't want deGrom. They do. But they were more aggressive in pursuit of another player. So that was kind of the first step. From here, look, the deGrom and the Aaron Judge free agencies have a similar quality in that the teams are both kind of guessing what the player wants to do and trying to read tea leaves just like everybody else. There hasn't been a lot that the team has. I mean, they've had conversations with the player. I think Billy Epler said that publicly. He and deGrom sat down after the loss to San Diego. And both sides know that if they're going to keep the relationship going, the communication probably needs to be better, and some of the vibes probably need to be better. And they're trying to figure out if deGrom wants to be here. And that's just kind of where they are at the beginning of this process. They don't really know, as far as I know to this moment, and I of course hope to continually learn more about this as the day and weeks go on, but I don't think the Mets have a real strong indication of when this might get resolved just yet.
Andy, when you're talking about that kind of number, a contract that we expect to exceed $40 million per year, and it's safe to say deGrom wants to get paid even more than Scherzer, which would take it to around 44. Do you think that creates some kind of urgency with the Mets to get that yes or no more quickly than other guys? Because that amount can impact you in, not saying these are who they interested in, but Rodon, Trea Turner, names like that, when you're talking about that level of dollar amount, when those names can go quickly.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm sure they would love clarity early. Not keep bringing it back to the Judge thing, but they're so parallel right now. And Cashman said the other day when he was asked the same question about Judge, it's like you would prefer to know what you're dealing with as early as possible, but you don't. The team doesn't always have that ability. Now, the Mets could make a strong offer today, give a deadline to it, and move on, but they also have to be careful with how this plays out and making sure that everybody understands that they really are trying for deGrom. And, you can't just be like, okay, if you don't take our offer by midnight Friday, it's off the table. That'd be a tough way to treat Jacob deGrom as well as he's played for the franchise. So, yeah, they would, of course. Connor, yeah, like all these other things they could possibly do kind of depend on whether they're paying deGrom $40 million a year. So they'd love to know whether they're going to have that ability. We'll see. I that's one of the things I'd like to know this week, or try to learn more about this week, frankly.
There's a few other internal free agents. You talked about Brandon Nimmo briefly. Chris Bassett declined his side of the mutual option. Taijuan Walker opted out just like Jacob deGrom did. And the Mets hold a team option on Carlos Carrasco. What can you tell me about those three starters and kind of where do you envision that going? And specifically regarding Walker, do you think there's a chance they would make him the qualifying offer?
Oh, that's a good question, Joe. I don't see why not. The 1 year deal overpay has been something that Sandy Alderson's been willing to do on qualifying offers. Not that he's running baseball operations right now, but he's obviously still the team president. That philosophy has been, I remember him saying to me years ago, there's almost no bad 1 year contract. Has been the way the Mets have operated. So I don't have a definitive answer on the qualifying offer for Walker, but he seems like someone who'll have a market elsewhere. And so picking up that draft pick probably makes some sense for the Mets. And it'd probably be a reasonable risk to think that he would try to sign elsewhere and the Mets would be able to pick up that pick. So, yeah.
Do you think Carrasco team option, do you have a lean either way, yes or no, that they would pick that up or not? I mean, they already created 3 holes in the rotation. Do they want to purposely create a 4th?
Well, exactly. I think it makes all the sense in the world to pick that up just because, as you said, Joe, they're losing most of the rotation in free agency. Even if they bring some guys back, I mean, currently they have so few starters under control. I would pick up that option. I don't believe they've made a final determination on that yet. Trying to figure out if that will happen this week. Going to ask Billy Epler about that soon, of course. But to me, that seems like pretty close to a no-brainer.
While the attention is on the players, we know the Mets at some point will have to find, a team president for when Sandy Alderson officially is no longer with this team. It sounds like, and I know you've been on this, Andy, that a baseball ops president is probably not happening necessarily this year. But has there been any updates or any buzz around that team president spot lately?
It's moving slowly. Steve Cohen's been doing interviews for a few months now. They're working with a search firm. I've been told that the names of the people they're interviewing are not names that would be instantly recognizable to the baseball fan. They're looking for a revenue side person, someone to help the Mets on the business side. Having said that, if someone, as always, were to become available that could be have a different profile, Cohen's going to be open-minded to that, but it's not going to be Theo Epstein. It's not going to be David Stearns. That's not a team president. That's a potential baseball president at some point down the line. I mean, it could be. You can do whatever you want with that title. Saul Katz was the team president for years. I mean, it's like a different profile. So it's flexible, but as of now, it's not like a front burner, frankly, thing that I'm reporting on like last year's GM search, because I don't think it's going to be a person who has as strong of a public impact as like Sandy Alderson, for example, who's a name that every baseball fan knows very well.
Last one for you, Andy. Is there any noise yet on external free agents that the Mets could potentially have some interest in? Or is it one, too early for that? And two, does that all really depend on Jacob deGrom when you're talking about the bigger fish?
Well, it doesn't all depend on deGrom, but certainly, as we've talked about, logic would dictate that you
Yeah.
need to know your budget before you figure out how you can play. And the Mets will have a budget. Look, they deferred the full 20, more than 25% of Diaz's contract to keep his luxury tax number down. So they're mindful of that Cohen tax, which I believe is 293 million this year. So yeah, these things are all interrelated. These decisions in a world without having to worry about that, I would say that they've definitely been thinking about Trea Turner and talking about Trea Turner amongst themselves. Whether that's realistic is a whole other story, but everyone knows he's really, really amazing player. But I'll say they definitely like, oh, wouldn't that be cool? So I'm interested to follow that. Tyler Anderson, a starter who's not attached to probably not going to be attached to a qualifying offer, of course. That's someone I could see. I mean, obviously, it's going to have to be multiple starting pitchers, and he's someone who everyone is tempted by those pitchers that come out of the Dodger car wash, like all shiny and new, and all of a sudden, like amazing pitchers. And Anderson's the current model that way. So that could be somebody. But at this point in the offseason, it's a whiteboard with dozens of names on it. And then you start having these meetings with agents kind of methodically and seeing where the fits might be.
All right, Andy, we know it's going to be a busy week out there at the GM meeting. So everybody, a reminder, check out all of his reporting on SNY.TV. Thanks so much for the time, and we'll talk to you soon, Andy.
All right, thanks, guys.
Great stuff, as always, from SNY MLB insider Andy Martino. Always love having Andy on the show, and it is going to be a crazy week out there in Vegas for the GM meetings. And a reminder to everybody, you're listening to the Mets Pod. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. And one more note from the show. The Mets Pod will be doing a live episode at this year's Queens Baseball Convention presented by SNY. Saturday, December 3rd at the 4 Points by Sheridan and Flushing. Come see us, as well as the other awesome panels, plus autograph and Q&A sessions with special guest Bartolo Colon, R.A. Dickey, and Howard Johnson. Tickets are on sale now. For more information and to purchase tickets, visit queensbaseballconvention.com. All right, Joe, plenty of stuff from Andy. Obviously, I think we start with the Diaz extension, not just because I've never seen you support a player through the highs and lows, not just the highs, as much as Edwin Diaz. He is now a New York Met for the next half decade on a deal that I was quite pleased with, honestly. This is right around where I thought it would come in. It actually got done earlier than I expected. It was pretty clear as day, and Andy kind of confirmed it, that there was as much interest from Diaz in staying with the Mets organization compared to the Mets wanting him back. So just what were your initial thoughts when this deal came through over the weekend?
I mean, the deal ended up being roughly what we thought. I think we had talked about it on our bullpen episode. I think we said 5 years, 100 million or so.
Yeah.
So, I mean, pretty much right up against that. So I think he got largely what everybody expected that he would get. And, I give him some credit for signing when he did, because he was mere 4 or 5 days away from having other teams be able to woo him for his services. Also, it would squeeze a few extra bucks out of the Mets if you wanted to. And obviously, that's something a lot of players will do. So it's a big credit for Diaz, I would say, to say, hey, I want to be compensated fairly, but I want that compensation to come from the New York Mets. And they hammered out a deal. And I know there's going to be skeptics out there about reliever contracts and how they typically don't work out. While that is factual and backed up by data, the Mets could not afford to let Edwin Diaz walk out that door. No. If you just switch the name of Mets sign Edwin Diaz for 5 years, 102 to Dodgers, or insert another team here, the Mets would be getting crushed for letting him walk for that contract. So it's a lot of money for a reliever. There's no question about it, but he has proven now, prior to coming to New York at the end of his run in Seattle, in the shortened 2020 season, in the 2021 season, and on the highest level, the 2022 season, that Edwin Diaz is a guy that I think you could buy into for at least the majority of this contract. the numbers on paper are there when you just Edwin Diaz baseball reference. The numbers match up and make sense as the best closer in baseball. And when you look at all of the underlying stuff, that's all there too. So it kind of checks out at all levels. And this is a guy that just came from, standing at his locker after giving up home run after home run in 2019 and took the verbal beatings, took everything that came along with New York and bounced back in a huge way. And he earned this contract. And, I'm happy for him. I'm happy for the Mets. And it makes me feel a lot better going into this free agency period, knowing that closer is not something that they have to worry about.
Well said. I mean, we talked about it on the bullpen show. It came down to a couple things, right? One, the Mets did not have some in-house player that was going to replace Edwin Diaz, even at 70% of what Edwin Diaz was and has been for the Mets. So that was not an option. Two, there wasn't really anyone else that you comfortably sign at the top of reliever market and say, yeah, this is our closer. And we are expecting to be in the World Series hunt next year. And this is our guy in the highest of leverage spots. I mean, the Craig Kimbrells of the world, Kenley Jansen, Taylor Rogers. And then after that, you get into guys like Andrew Chafin that we want as a setup man. I mean, not as a close. That's like that's how thin the reliever market is. So, and then honestly, it comes down to a couple of things, right? The Mets obviously love the person that is Edwin Diaz at 29 years old, that they feel like a 5-year deal is going to actually age quite well, that there will be closers over this time that pass what Diaz got, and Diaz will be pitching at a level that is top 5 for relievers in the MLB. And when you take away, and I know these arguments can be a little loose at times or a little dicey, but Joe, when you take away the 2019 peak juice ball year, and you look at what Diaz has been from 2016 up all the way until now, without that year, he's been maybe the best reliever in baseball throughout that entire time. So it's not the fact of Diaz is a roller coaster pitcher. It's more that he had 1 year where the adjustment period was obviously really brutal in a time where the baseball was unlike anything we've ever seen, that the other end of the spectrum is really who we and the Mets think Edwin Diaz is and will be going forward.
It's evident what year was the outlier, to your point. Like, I think a lot of people thought 2019 Edwin Diaz was what he was becoming, but now that we're 3 seasons removed, it's clear as day that that was the outlier. The juice ball playing a role, the adjustment to New York, a lot of things that happened that year didn't work out for Edwin, and it's just a massive credit to him for bouncing back. And I mean, there were people in my mentions wanting to non-tender Edwin Diaz. Jeff Passan reported at the 2020 trade deadline, the Mets want to trade Edwin Diaz and nobody wants him, end of story. And now here we are 2 years later, and he's warranted the biggest contract in history for a reliever. And Mets fans have gone from wanting to non-tender him, get rid of him, to people are buying foam trumpets at the Mets team store. And Edwin Diaz is, if we're being honest, he's got to be probably one of the top 5 most popular players on the team at this point. So huge credit to him.
He's one of the most popular players in baseball, which is wild for a reliever. But I just have either friends in the football space that don't even care about baseball, and they know Edwin Diaz because of the trumpets, because of the entrance, because of the social media impact, and obviously the caliber player he is. So this was awesome that the Mets got this done. And I think, Joe, it's so vital to get this done in this window that it opens up the door for everybody else to worry about all the other business the Mets need to take care of, rather than being deep in the Diaz extensions while the doors open everywhere else, where you're checking in on Nimmo, you're checking in on your external options. And how can we not talk about it, even though we briefly touched on it with Andy, the big fish of the internal options in Jacob deGrom, where as we sit here and record this show, obviously the rumors are all over the place. And they're the same rumors we've heard for how long right now, that a lot of people think deGrom wants to leave. Then you have some teammates saying deGrom said he wants to stay. I think the bottom line is, Joe, especially after hearing from Andy, we know the Mets are going to make a pretty significant effort to keep deGrom here. But wisely, I think they're going to be careful what line they avoid stepping over, so that they are not played by deGrom, driven up a price for him to go somewhere else, or just taken advantage of by the Mets, and miss out on all the options that can replace the production you would be paying for him.
It's very important. I know Andy mentioned in the interview. It's not like they're going to say, Jake, this is our offer. You have 48 hours, accept it, take it or leave it, or we're moving on. But they can't afford, from a time standpoint, to be carried on this free agent chase where he's going to talk to the Rangers, the Braves.
It can't go for weeks. I mean, it just can't.
Yeah, it's something they have to make a decision if Jacob deGrom is going to be a part of this team going forward, and Jake has to decide, what side of this reporting is true. Is he telling all of his former friends that he wants to stay and that's not true? Or is the reporting out there that, Jacob deGrom doesn't like New York anymore and he's been rubbed wrong by a few things, whether that's what his contract was, whether that was Sandy Alderson commenting about his elbow in 2021, I believe that was, and where Jake had that really short thing with the media where he's like, I'm fine, and then just walked away. Mm-hmm. So you wonder if there is bad blood. I personally believe it's going to come down to money. Like 99% of these things do. We make,
in life.
Yeah, there are stories out there and, some valid, some not. Like I remember George Springer. How badly did George Springer want to come home to Connecticut where his family was and be near the Mets? Well, guess what? The Blue Jays offered him $20 million or $25 million more, and he's in Canada. So, largely that's kind of where things go. And I think it's mainly contract-based. Jake signed the deal that he did, and Garrett Cole went and got the 10-year or 8-year deal right after, and now Max Scherzer on his own team is making more money. So I get it, but the Mets also need to decide, is Jacob deGrom $40+ million the right investment for this team as we look ahead to having to do something about Brandon Nimmo, having to do something about the rest of your rotation, building a bullpen? And if Nimmo leaves, you have to replace that in the offense as well. So I'm very interested to see how aggressive they're going to be with Jake and how willing they will be to maybe let him walk out the door because you take that $40 million and repurpose it throughout the team in a different way.
Which we've discussed a lot in this podcast, and during the mailbag of today's show, we will get even deeper into that. It seems crazy, Joe, but my take on the deGrom situation is that it's a lot more simple than a lot of people are making it appear. Free agency is going to open because of the caliber player, or should I say caliber of free agent he is, especially when you're valued on the peak version of yourself, not the guy that's missed a lot of time the last 2 years. You're going to know quickly how many players are in the sweepstakes. We believe, and this is a little bit of guesswork, but also being tuned in on just what all the media reports are saying, the Mets will be involved. Sounds like the Texas Rangers make some sense. There's been things about the Braves, I don't know. And then maybe you get a mystery team that kind of nibbles around in that area. And then you get into who's offering $40 to $45 million a year. I think the Mets are going to be one of those teams. And if deGrom delays that decision or tries to draw out that decision, that's an alarm to the Mets. You've been here your entire career. You've been here for the start and where this new ownership is now, and on a team that just won over 100 games with your buddy now, Max Scherzer, on the roster and still on the roster. There's no maybe this and that. And if you're the Mets, this is what we always talk about on the show with taking emotion out of decisions, the what you've done for me compared to what you're going to do for me. The bottom line is, if intuition will settle in, that gut feeling will settle in, they will know. And if they have to pull the plug real quick, and yeah, that might be a tough PR hit for some of the fan base. I don't really think it is for us, knowing the circumstances. Then you move to get replacement options with that $40 to $45 million that we believe is too high impact players. And then nobody cares. I'm sorry, but if that money is Trea Turner plus, Rodon plus, the Mets are trying to win, not just build legacy. And we love Jacob deGrom and want him to be here. But my take is the Mets are going to know really quickly where he stands, and that decision is entirely up to him.
And I also wonder, because Billy Epler, like Andy said, met with deGrom after the San Diego series. There might have been more in that conversation than we are privy to. Mm-hmm. And that's good. Like we don't necessarily need to know everything, but everything you said just makes a ton of sense to me. If Jacob deGrom takes the Mets money, then all this conversation for months about he hates the Mets, he hates this, he hates that, go out the window. He's back, he's under contract. Yeah, it's all leverage. But if he leaves and, he turns down that money or doesn't, show a real inkling that he wants to accept it in the near term, if that money goes out that door, that 40 to 45 million, then the floodgates open for possibilities. Like you said, it's Trea Turner in something. It's Carlos Rodon in something. Andy has reported that they won't go hard after Aaron Judge, but hypothetically, it's Aaron Judge for Jacob deGrom. So, there's a lot of things that the Mets could do. And I think if Jacob deGrom actually walks out the door, it increases the flexibility and creativity that Billy Epler in the front office can have with that money. Because think about it, if Andy mentioned them being cognizant of the Cohen tax, and I'm sure they are, but it is basically impossible for them to not exceed it. I had them at just about 225 million before the Edwin Diaz deal, so it's a little under 20 million, I think, AAV with the luxury tax. So that's putting you into the 240s, and you still have deGrom to deal with, Nimmo to deal with, the rest of a rotation, a bullpen. You're exceeding the Cohen tax. But if Jake takes up 40, 45 million of that, you quickly are very low on space to fill in the rest of the puzzle.
I mean, you are betting the house that Jake is pitching almost a full season. There's no other. It's hard words that a lot of people probably don't want to hear. If you're paying a guy $40 to $45 million a year, and it is it leaves you hamstrung on what else you can do, you are expecting Cy Young version deGrom. Fair or not fair, that's what it comes with.
And the reality, too, is you're saying $90 million in Max Scherzer and Jacob deGrom. That's the reason we're going to win if we win. We're going to win because of them, and that's it. It doesn't mean, if they sign deGrom, it doesn't mean the rest of their moves are going to be $5 million a year moves, but it limits, you can't constantly stack 20 million a year, 25 million a year, 20 million a year on top of each other while having those, Lindor at 34 million, Scherzer at 43. If you bring Jake back at 43,
Pete's day will come.
Yeah, Pete's day will come. I think we've quickly become we love Jacob deGrom, but from a team building standpoint, I really am wondering, I think when they signed deGrom, I feel like I'm limited in how else I can make the team better. But if you let deGrom go, as tough as that is from a PR standpoint and an upside standpoint, I think it increases how maybe more well-balanced you can make the roster.
So let's go right there as we transition into the mailbag and start with that. Dan and RI asked us, if we don't re-sign deGrom, who do you sign for the starting rotation? I'd bring back Carrasco and re-sign Bassett and maybe Walker. So Dan's kind of the approach that bring back your internal guys. You have Scherzer, and then obviously you're assuming a guy like Peterson or McGill is going to round out that rotation. I think we've been pretty transparent on this show that as much as we like Taijuan Walker and think that's one of the Mets' better free agent signings in the last 10 years when you look at value compared to results, I think we'd be surprised if Walker doesn't find a much better deal elsewhere. But I think if deGrom's not back, the part of Bassett in the equation raises significantly.
I would say so too. As far as bringing everything back, like you said, Walker, I mean, if he has a market out there that allows me to make him a qualifying offer and he tells me no, that seems ideal to me, because the Mets are adding more draft picks, and Walker was great, but he's not someone I would bet on going forward. You and I agree, and Andy did as well. Carlos Carrasco, that feels like a no-brainer, but until it's done, obviously it's still up in the air. I don't think they necessarily need to go and sign a Carlos Rodon. It could be an option, but I don't think they need to go to a $25-30 million a year arm. And where we stand today, too, on November 8th for the GM meetings, we're at the very beginning of the offseason. Edwin Diaz signing during this period is an anomaly. This basically doesn't happen. You're going to see a lot of rumors and a lot of inaction over the next couple weeks. Some stuff will happen, but I don't think it's going to be a ton. The trade market is what we don't know yet. And the Mets did it last year when they got Bassett. They could have signed a free agent starter. Instead, They gave up JT Ginn and Adam Oller and brought Bassett in, and he made $8 or $9 million this year. The trade market's going to matter, whether that's a Shane Bieber from Cleveland, whether that's Milwaukee shopping a Brandon Woodruff or a Corbin Burns. Like, those are possibilities as their arbitration prices rise. So I think right now we're hyper focused on free agency because it's evident what that is. You type in MLB trade rumors, free agents, or whatever, and boom, a list pops up, Spotrac, wherever you look. And the trade market is kind of unknown and probably will be unknown for at least the next week or two. But as we progress, they're going to have the ability to pursue starters in the trade market, especially given all the prospects that they hung on to at the trade deadline.
Yeah, they're going to have to. We've highlighted they're going to have to get creative somewhere else. And when we say creative, it's not something we've never seen before. It's more of the things that we can't see in advance unless it was sourced. And that's a sense of needing to find ways to get better without adding $25 million per player, right? Like there's going to be those moves, and that move alone could be deGrom and something else. That move alone can be 3 players minus deGrom. But you're right. The trade aspect is how you Bassett's a perfect example, how you get significantly better in the top 3 of your rotation. And instead of giving up dollars and adding on to your luxury tax, in a sense, you're more so trading talent. So, but back to free agency, because that is what we do know. This one from Aurelio Morales, who asked, if the Mets were to sign Trea Turner, should they look to put him at second or try him in center field? Joe, you and I kind of had an interesting combo about this behind the scenes, the center field situation. It kind of feels like the unknown right now with Trea Turner potentially there.
Yeah, it's all over. I'm seeing on Twitter and everywhere be like, oh, yeah, sign Trea Turner to play him in center field. His skill set seemingly would translate to center field. He's fast. He's athletic. The reality is the last time he played center field was 2016. So it's not as if there is this very recent sample size where he's been versatile and been out there. He basically hasn't played it in years, whereas second base is something he at least played during the 2021 season when he came over with Scherzer to the Dodgers. They had Corey Seager over at short, so Trea filled in at second. My guess would be if they signed Trea Turner, which it's an interesting idea. I think he adds a dynamic to this team that they're lacking. And, it may not be quite the thump that you and I have talked about, but a unique speed element, extra base hit, contact ability, high average and on base skills. Trea Turner's kind of the total package that still could hit you 15, 20 home runs a year. But I would guess, I don't know for sure, but I would guess they'd probably look at him as an infielder. And maybe that means Jeff McNeil becomes a almost everyday outfielder in the corners and Starling Marte finds his way back to center field.
Turner's definitely interesting. He definitely is on the side of speed, contact, high batting average. But I will say he hit 21 homers last year. He hit 28 the year before that. And then when you look at 2018-19, counting full seasons, he hit 19 each of those years. So, yeah, I mean, you're right, Joe. He's not the thump. Like, you're not getting 35 home runs from Trea Turner, but 20 to 25 with speed and average, I mean, it would be exciting for Mets fans. I think it just goes back to the overall Trea Turner in a vacuum is exciting. You celebrate it. You can't wait. He's going to make your team better. The question is, what does the blueprint look like if Trea Turner is your move? Are you trading for a center fielder because you're not also going to pay Nimmo $20 to $25 million? That's the hard part about putting Turner in the puzzle without the other pieces. It's tricky, right?
Yeah, it is a tricky way to kind of put your team together. I would imagine, like I said, I think McNeil is obviously a guy that has to play every day, and he would end up in the outfield. And does that mean Marcana's moved, despite him saying he wants to spend the rest of his career with the Mets? Does that mean Starling Marte just goes to center and you say, hey, our difference in offense is we're bringing Trea Turner in instead of Brandon Nimmo, and then maybe they'll upgrade at DH. Maybe they'll sign a Jose Abreu or a JD Martinez or someone like that. And they might just say, look, that's our offense. Everyone's under contract. It's kind of what it is.
All right, another one here from John Filippelli. I think we nailed that. Who would be your number one free agent outside from the Mets' own free agency. So, Joe, I think we'll take this one as a dream free agent. I'm not going to say Judge because I feel like that's just chalk at this point. Like, yeah, you'd love to see Judge in the Mets uniform, but let's account money, term, all that does matter and is more projected. Who would be your number one free agent you would like to see from the Mets? And I think to answer this question, you're assuming that deGrom is now gone.
Yeah, if deGrom's gone and we're just thinking who's our top guy, I'm gonna be honest. I think I would actually just sign Aaron Judge. I know you said let's not
take
go with it.
I'd rather somebody use that.
I'll just take Aaron Judge. I mean, he's probably never repeating 2022 ever again. But I think this is a guy that's going to be everything the Mets need. He's proven he could handle New York. He's, you have to imagine he's at worst a 35 home run a year guy going forward. And as he gets older and works his way out of being in the outfield, the designated hitter becomes an open possibility for him. The reality is, I want to see the Mets, if Jacob deGrom's going to walk out the door, I personally don't think the blueprint should be sign Carlos Rodon and sign another starter, and there you go. You just kind of get two pitchers for the price of deGrom that neither are actually as good as deGrom, so is it really making your team better? If that money walks out the door, I want to see them do something impactful on the offensive side that's going to be a game changer, whether that's a Judge, who would probably be my top guy, or Trea Turner we just talked about, Carlos Correa. Like, I would like to repurpose that money to the offense and just change the team that, while 101 wins was great, it's clear that team didn't end up being built for the long postseason run.
And my answer is Trea Turner. I think that, listen, I'd love Judge, right? But to give a different perspective, Turner's 29. There's been some rumblings that he's interested in returning to the East Coast. Maybe that'll help you a little bit in this case. I think that his athleticism makes him very flexible in the field, whether we know Lindor's playing short. Like, there's no conversation about that. Turner, obviously, we know would be fine at second. We've seen it. Maybe there's the chance that he converts to center. We don't know that until something like that comes to the table. But I think he's got underrated pop. I love his stolen base threat that we thought we were getting a little bit more of that in Marte and Lindor. And don't get me wrong, they haven't been duds running the bases. It's not like that. But we know the dynamic threat Turner is, where now you're looking at the Mets and going, man, they have a lot of guys at the top of the lineup in Turner, Marte, and Lindor that could steal bags, that can hit for pop when needed, that get on base. And then you combat that Turner and McNeil's ability to hit for average with Pete in the lineup. Maybe, like you said, you're signing a DH for some power that won't cost you anything crazy, or you trade for that power. I'm just very intrigued by the player Trea Turner is, and the fact that a lot of people are assuming that he's going to age poorly because speed is so much of his game. He's 29. We'll see what the deal looks like. I think the Turner signing would be a lot of fun for this Mets team in the lineup and in the field.
And he does more than just run, right? Like, there's a lot of speed-based players that is their number one tool. That might be Trea Turner's second or third best tool, to be honest.
Great point.
He's a big speed guy, but his bat-the-ball skills are elite. His defense is fantastic. I think he's obviously a great fit. The team that I am worried about when you talk about Trea Turner, keep an eye on the Philadelphia Phillies.
Yeah, it'd be a problem.
Turner has interest. There's reported interest. He wants to come back east. Max Scherzer supposedly wanted to stay on the West Coast. Obviously,
shows what that means sometimes.
Yeah, shows what that means sometimes. But if we're gonna go with he prefers to be on the East Coast, the Phillies just declined Gene Segura's $17 million team option. Zach Eflin opted out of his $15 million mutual option. What does that money seem to add up to? The amount that might cost you Trea Turner. So I think that is a team to very much watch in the Turner sweepstakes. And I know previously in the Edwin Diaz trade, there was worried about the Phillies pursuing Edwin Diaz. I hope the Mets don't overreact in a sense to the Phillies potentially going for Turner. But to me, he fits this Mets team absolutely like a glove. Just worried that we may be seeing him 18 times a year instead of 162.
Yeah, I could do without that for sure.
Yeah.
All right. One last question on today's show from Patrick Chamberlain. He said, If you could own any pro sports franchise that isn't one of your favorite teams, what team would you choose and why?
Most valuable sports
Yeah, there you go.
franchises.
Well, I know it. Oh, you can't pick the Cowboys because you
No,
like the Cowboys.
I love the Cowboys. The Yankees, because they're the second most.
Dude,
They're
come
the second.
on. You can't pick
No.
the Yankees.
Sure, I could. They're the second most valuable, and then I could just sell them for an upcharge. No, honestly, if you think kind of across the landscape of sports, I would want to get away from the sports that I'm distinctly interested in, because like I wouldn't want to own a different baseball team and root against the Mets. I wouldn't want to own a different football team and root against the Cowboys. Like I'd buy the Lakers. Like,
Yeah, I was going to say the answer is probably the Lakers.
Yeah, you buy the Lakers. NBA, I don't have a rooting interest. I know you do, but I don't. So from my perspective, I would own the team that has LeBron James as a player, and I love LeBron, and it's a very valuable premium franchise. So I think that would be a cool one to own.
Yeah, I don't blame you at all. I think I would be one of those dreadful owners that is involved in team operations if I had a football team, obviously.
You'd be Jerry Jones.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So I would definitely have to pick a football team. When you look at the value, man, the Rams are the third most valuable sports franchise on this list that I'm reading. I know they are in a state where they have no draft capital. Things do not look right, but you're telling me I can go live in Los Angeles, own the Rams, run the team how I want to run the team. I think that's an easy answer. So yeah, you're right. It comes down to value. Football has value. I'm not in tune enough with the Premier League to pick it's hard to pick any team associated with soccer for me, but I would understand why many would do that, whether it's Real Madrid, Barcelona, obviously one of the teams in the English Premier League. So interesting question there, man. It really just comes down to money and I think interest. And baseball doesn't fit that.
You're such an NFL draft guy. I feel like you would just sell the Rams players for draft picks. You'd be like, we lost these draft picks.
Everyone.
I need them back.
Trade everyone.
Yeah, we're starting over.
Literally everyone, counting Aaron Donald. Aaron Donald would be the first player I would trade for 3 first-round picks.
I love it. That's great. Yeah, no, but just kind of talking generally, like I put out this mailbag tweet every week. As we're doing these off-season shows, we're going to touch on every rumor, everything you could think of, every move that happens. So if you have these kind of funny questions that are going to kind of throw us off and maybe put us off the rails a little bit, yeah, I think it's a fun idea to close the show with. We've done some things like this in the past, like favorite sport and gym class and things like. Yeah, that was great, but we can have a little fun with this. There's going to be plenty of Mets content week in and week out, but why not have a little fun too?
And with that, a reminder to everybody that we will be with you every single week throughout the offseason. We are not going anywhere. As Joe said, we will react to every rumor, signing, trade, hire, whatever it is for the Mets. We know there's going to be a lot of them. It might even start with next week's show. We don't know. We can't wait. And we are also excited to meet plenty of you at the Queens Baseball Convention as well. So go to queensbaseballconvention.com for information and the ability to buy tickets as well. So one last reminder to everyone, subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much. Catch you next week.